I was sitting at my sister-in-law Nina's when my husband, James, asked, with a strange smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" My sister-in-law and husband had been secretly poisoning me for months to ruin my career, but I outwitted them and took everything. The coffee cup in front of me had a weird, almost metallic smell that made my stomach turn at the elegant dining table in her Nashville home, where we got together for our monthly family brunch. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never thought I'd be wondering if my own husband was trying to poison me, but after 3 years of marriage and innumerable accidental food poisoning incidents taught me to be wary, especially around Nina, who had a way of setting up scenarios that made me feel ill or ashamed every time with that same naive smile James was wearing. "How thoughtful of you," I said, forcing a smile as my mind raced. The scent emanating from the cup was unusual. The last time I was in urgent care after drinking tea at Na's house, the doctors were unable to explain my symptoms, and Nina insisted that she had prepared the tea precisely the same way she made her own. Watched me intently from across the table, absently stirring her own tea, was the first time I had ever smelled coffee. I had noticed James spending more time at Na's house lately, and she claimed they were planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. "James has become quite the barista lately," she said with a smirk. "He's been practicing different brewing methods just for you." The way she emphasized it for you sent shivers down my spine. James and Nina exchanged a quick look that confirmed my suspicions, and I pretended to take a sip of the coffee with its peculiar scent while observing their expressions. I also glanced at the strange texts I'd seen on his phone, the whispered conversations that ceased when I entered the room, and when I walked past Na's place, I purposefully stumbled and quickly switched our coffee cups in the confusion of steadying myself. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening up Sunshin. "Sometimes I'm such a klutz." I got up suddenly and asked if you would look at that. "I need to make a quick call for work, so no, would you mind if I used your study?" Waved off my apology with a tight smile, trying to avoid breaking anything in the study. I nodded and hurried out, my heart racing, but I could still see them at the table. Now, I had to wait and watch from the doorway of the study as Na raised the coffee cup to her lips, and I felt a knot in my stomach from anxiety. It wasn't always like this. When I first met James 3 years ago at a friend's wedding in Nashville, he was charming and attentive, and Nina had seemed welcoming and inviting. However, I needed to know the truth because I'd spent too many hours in emergency rooms and too many nights doubled over in pain after sharing meals with them, family get-togethers and volunteering to assist with our wedding planning. But in hindsight, I should have recognized the warning signs when she would inadvertently spill items on my dress during significant occasions, or when my food always seemed to have extra seasoning when she assisted in the kitchen. The incident began mildly with an upset stomach and progressed to a mild allergic reaction. The worst was 2 months ago when I ended up in the hospital after eating breakfast at their house. The doctors discovered traces of something in my system that they couldn't identify, but James persuaded everyone that it must be something I ate earlier or that I must be coming down with something. My own untouched cup of coffee sat cold on the table where I'd left it, and the metallic smell still lingered in my nose, making me shudder. Nah. Must have taken some expired medication. I gripped the door frame and watched as she took another sip of coffee while James was typing on his phone, seemingly indifferent. A slight tremor in Na's hand caught my attention. She put the cup down, her face went pale, and she said, "James," her voice trembling. "Something's wrong," she said. James looked up, his face changing from bewildered to horrified as he realized which cup she was drinking from. He leaped to his feet, knocking over his chair, and asked, "Why, Nina, what's happening?" Na's hands were shaking now. "I don't think so." She staggered and grabbed the table's edge for balance. "James, what did you put in that coffee?" I asked as I left the study, my phone recording, and James was at my side. "No, his face is pale now. I wasn't supposed to be your cup," he whispered, but in the quiet of the dining room, "You call an ambulance," she said, her eyes widening with realization and fear. "Please, I can't," she gasped, sliding to the ground. I dialed 911 right away, keeping my hand steady despite the chaos that was happening in front of me. Now that Nah was on the ground, her body was shaking violently, and James was kneeling next to her, his face showing panic as he realized, Team Emergency Services. Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542, Maple Grove Drive, I said, obviously holding my phone recording in my other hand. See, my sister-in-law seems to be having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious but trembling as I spoke to the dispatcher. Nah. Eyes. Their plan had completely failed. Locked upon mine, and instead of the usual icy calculation in her eyes, Christina exclaimed, "Oh, you switched, you knew." The dispatcher reassured me, "Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way. Please stay on the line." James was growing more frantic by the second. "Nope. You said it would only make her ill enough to miss the board meeting next week, and you promised it wouldn't be traced, so my blood ran cold at the board meeting where I was. What's happening that wasn't supposed to? I mean, it wasn't meant for James Ana to shut up, splitting through gritted teeth, her anger temporarily overriding her distress. Everything started to fall into place on a Tuesday last month, when I was scheduled to present my proposal for a major client account at the same account Nina had been attempting to land for months at our rival firm, and the breakfast incident 2 months ago. My voice was surprisingly steady, and her face contorted with she clutched her stomach, doubling over as she said, "He said we just needed to discredit you and make clients think you were unreliable." The sound of sirens filled the air outside. As she said, "He said that the tea was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation, but you went anyway." Nah. Stopped talking and said, "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Nah. Said, slurring her words a little, "And we've been planning this for months ever since Christina started outperforming me at every client meeting you were supposed to be at." James got up and backed away from us both. I hurriedly moved aside to allow the paramedics to work as they loaded Nina onto a stretcher after they burst through the front door. I then stopped recording and sent the video to my private email and then to my lawyer, James, who stood motionless as his painstakingly planned strategy fell apart. The emergency room at Nashville General Hospital was bustling with activity as I told the paramedics, "I'll ride with her to the hospital, as I need to make sure my sister-in-law gets the proper treatment." I met James' terrified gaze and assured them that the doctors would be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. Doctors hurried to treat Nina, and I sat in the waiting area with my phone in my hand, playing back the recording of her confession. The tremors in her voice and the fear in her eyes were all the proof I needed to show that this wasn't just my paranoia. A nurse called out, and I got up, noticing James' noticeable absence. Said that she had parked the car 20 minutes ago and hadn't come back. I'm her sister-in-law, so I asked the nurse, who was coming through the double doors, how she was doing because she was stable, but we discovered alarming levels of toxins in her system. The nurse said that her expression was serious, and the doctor wanted to talk to you about some strange findings, and I took a deep breath, took out my phone, and thought, you should listen to this first. Her blood work was done by Dr. Phillips, a tall woman with graying hair and sharp eyes who was waiting by Nah.'s room counter. Is Mrs. Bennett able to tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law became ill? I played the recording from brunch, watching the James appeared at the end of the hallway, his face pale and sweaty, clearly overhearing the doctor's words, but the doctor's expression changed from professional concern to alarm as she made notes on her tablet about a substance we found that isn't something that accidentally ends up in coffee. Instead, we're looking at deliberate contamination. Christina began to move toward me, so I told him to hold back. Dr. Phillips warned him to press the nurse's call button to secure room 412. James raised his hands in surrender, but this was all a misunderstanding. She was perplexed and didn't really understand what she was saying, so I pulled up the texts I found on these messages between you and Nah. Regarding making sure I'm out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just friendly exchanges. His face was devoid of color. She went through my phone after I discovered the odd vial in your desk, and yes, I did. I turned to Dr. Phillips. I had secretly forwarded the messages to myself last week. The doctor's eyes narrowed today. We'll need to compare security and make sure your husband is still available for questioning. I've been hospitalized 3 times in the last 6 months for unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in
Nah.
System. 2 security guards appeared, positioning. When Nina and he stammered, you were working too hard taking all the big clients.
Nah.
Said, if we could just make you take some time off by poisoning me. James appeared trapped, his carefully crafted facade crumbling on either side of him. Even though my hands were shaking with anger, I spoke steadily, asking, how long have you been doing this? Were you the ones who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too? James' silence was all I needed to know. Behind him, I could see
Nah.
room, where she lay hooked up to multiple monitors. Her previous confidence had vanished, replaced by the Detective Mendoza is on her way, Dr. Phillips stated quietly, and she'll want to take statements from everyone involved. They were afraid that someone who understood their plans had finally caught up with them. I nodded, experiencing a peculiar sort of relief as the truth was at last being revealed and there was no turning back. Detective. She was a seasoned investigator who specialized in domestic abuse cases, and Mendoza arrived within an hour. Her presence demanded attention in the sterile hospital corridor. She listened carefully as I played the brunch recording and showed her the text messages. And Mrs. Bennett, she said, going over her notes, and she mentioned prior, can you provide further details about hospitalizations? I took out my phone once more and opened a document that I had been secretly keeping for months. The first time was in February, following supper at
Nah.
place, when I experienced acute nausea and lightheadedness. The second was in April, following the tea incident. And then the detective's eyes narrowed as she examined my thorough log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. And you've been keeping records ever since I noticed the pattern. In June, after breakfast with them, my voice stayed steady as I continued. Each time the symptoms were similar but sufficiently different that the doctors were unable to determine a cause. When I was around them, I used my backup phone, which Annie also started carrying with a different number, to record conversations. I have multiple recordings of
Nah.
and James discussing their plans, though they are careful not to be explicit. In one of the recordings,
Nah.
voice was audibly Henderson. James's response was equally damning, saying, a sound got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Mendoza's face hardened as she listened through the window of
Nah.
account, which is worth millions of dollars. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough. Gunda Hospital is conducting toxicology tests, and the detective told me that Dr. Phillips has already found a number of substances that don't occur naturally. We'll need samples from your home as well. I could see that my sister-in-law was awake now and appeared much less confident than she had at brunch. A disturbance down the hall was also observed. James was arguing with the security guards when we caught sight of him. His voice rose in frustration as he said, hey, I need to talk to my wife. Christina, please, you don't realize we were trying to protect you. You're not advancing your case. We've already discovered it, Detective Mendoza said, putting himself in our way of Mr. Bennett. Evidence of premeditated James's laughter, a hollow sound that reverberated through the hallway, and we said, if we could just make her take some time off by poisoning her. Detective Mendoza's voice, that's not the only thing that would help. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. My voice was surprisingly calm. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? James's silence spoke volumes behind him, and I could see
Nah.
watching through her protection. Mr. Bennett, that's attempted murder. The color drained from James' face. When murder? No, that's not what we ever meant to do. We'll need both of their phones, Detective Mendoza informed the security guards, and I want officers posted at both doors. Her face was a mask of fear and calculation, and I wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this and explain away months of systematic poisoning as some sort of misguided attempt to help me. While James stayed outside with the guards, Dr. Phillips entered
Nah.
room with a tablet in hand and a grim expression as she reviewed the test results. Detective Mendoza and I followed, and
Nah.
attempted to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, but the tremors hadn't entirely gone away. The toxicology report reveals high levels of multiple substances. Dr. Phillips stated in her clinical voice that the most alarming finding is the existence of a specific compound that is commonly used in pharmaceutical testing and shouldn't be accessible to the general public. No, pal, that's not feasible, James said. Detective Mendoza interrupted, pulling out a notebook that contained mild symptoms similar to those your sister-in-law had been experiencing for the previous 6 months. The door opened, and another detective came in carrying an evidence bag that we discovered in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm, which he claimed to have presented. As I realized the full extent of their plan, I felt my knees weaken. He was recording everything like some sort of experiment, even though Nina protested, but her voice wavered. One only needed to keep track of what worked the first few times. There were several small bottles with clinical labels and detailed notes about dosages and reactions. Detective Mendoza concluded after looking at the bottles that you continued to attend meetings even though they weren't effective enough. Did you know that these substances could be fatal in higher concentrations? The room fell silent, and James, who was still visible through the window, sank into a chair in the hallway.
Nah.
S face twisted in a mix of fear and rage as you destroyed everything I had worked so hard to build for that client portfolio. I said, Henry account, and, slowly, the pieces clicked into place. It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently because the client specifically asked me to be their lead. For years, and then all of a sudden everyone wants to work with you. Instead, James said he could fix it by killing me. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusations, but they weren't trying to. She began, but Dr. Phillips interrupted her, giving Nina a look as he said, a concentration in the coffee you drank today. Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer, who said that if Mrs. Bennett had consumed it, the results would have been severe, possibly fatal, and that they would need a full warrant for both their homes and offices in addition to contacting the pharmaceutical company listed on these samples, which were much higher than previous ones we've examined from her prior hospital visits. Bottles to find out how they got these drugs. Nina sagged back against her pillows, the fight dripping from her face. She whispered, it wasn't supposed to go this far, and James continued to say, we just needed one more try. I moved toward her bed, speaking steadily despite my hands shaking. Every time I became ill, I missed every meeting, and I missed every client. The silence that followed was deafening outside, and I could hear James being read his rights as more officers arrived.
Nah.
Stared at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. Detective, I said, turning away from my sister-in-law. I lost you both. There, watching and taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of people does that make you? Shaim is now prepared to make my official declaration. I sat in the courtroom every day for 3 weeks, but it felt like years as the prosecution systematically presented their case against James and
Nah.
the evidence was overwhelming, with bottles from James' office and thorough notes on each. What most impressed me about the poisoning attempt was their demeanor throughout the proceedings. Normally, they were so poised and self-assured, but in her defendant's chair, James was unable to look at me and kept his eyes on the ground as expert witnesses described. The Dr. Phillips' testimony was especially damning because she provided a thorough analysis of the potentially fatal effects of the substances they had been using. She showed how they had increased the dosages over time with a clear intent to cause serious harm, and the pharmaceutical company representative confirmed that James had. The prosecutor contended in her closing statement that the defendant's deliberate pattern of behavior went beyond corporate sabotage and instead involved a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have led to death, after he had stolen the compounds from his college friend who worked in their research department. When the verdict was finally read, I was relieved rather than happy because James and Nina had been found guilty on several counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words reverberated throughout the quiet courtroom, and the long-term, premeditated nature of these acts against a family member calls for the maximum punishment. 1 year after the trial, I stood at the Nashville Business Leaders Podium and watched as they were taken away in handcuffs, thinking about how jealousy and greed had turned 2 people I had once trusted into something completely different: their freedom, their business, and their reputations, all in an effort to ruin me. Ironically, as I was getting ready to deliver the keynote address at the conference, Nina had attempted to keep me from getting the Henderson account, which she and James had been frantically trying to steal. This had resulted in a number of additional significant clients, making me one of the area's top marketing executives. I started by looking out at the sea of faces and saying, success isn't just about talent or hard work, it's about integrity, about building genuine relationships based on trust. I paused to let my words sink in. Sometimes, the people closest to us pose the biggest threats to our success, but overcoming those obstacles makes us stronger. After my speech, several young professionals came to me for advice. One woman with a determined look in her eyes asked how I had remained calm during the ordeal. I told her I gathered evidence, trusted my gut, and didn't let fear stop me from pursuing my goals. Later that night, I received an email from the Wynn Henderson's customer confirmed that they were extending their contract for an additional 3 years. I grinned as I considered how things might have gone differently if I hadn't followed my gut that day at breakfast. The local newspaper had published a brief piece that morning regarding
Nah.
and James started their incarceration. Choose not to read it, instead concentrating on the suggestion for my most recent customer project, being aware that the ideal retaliation wasn't regarding getting even,